A man I used to work with told me this once, quietly, while we were packing up late. He wasn't trying to scare me. He actually seemed embarrassed to mention it at all. He said he didn't believe in haunted houses. Still doesn't. But there was one place he rented briefly that he refuses to talk about unless someone asks directly. The house was on a normal street, nothing abandoned, nothing boarded up. What stood out was the price. It was far cheaper than anything else nearby. The landlord explained it away easily. Tenants moved on quickly, short stays, no damage, no complaints worth writing down. He only needed somewhere temporary, a few weeks while work settled. The viewing was unremarkable. Clean rooms, fresh paint, no smell of damp. There was just one space the landlord didn't linger in. A small room off the landing, empty, unfurnished. "It's just storage," the landlord said. The first night passed without incident. He slept normally, woke normally. The second evening, though, he realized something odd. He had avoided that small room all day, not consciously. He just hadn't gone near it. When he noticed this, he laughed at himself. Old houses have awkward layouts. Some rooms just feel unnecessary. But later, passing the doorway, he slowed. He couldn't explain why. The room wasn't dark. The light from the landing reached inside. Still, stepping past it felt like walking against a current. Not frightening, just resistant. Like the space didn't expect him to enter. By the third evening, he had begun to adjust his routine around the house. Not intentionally. It just happened. He used the kitchen less. He stayed longer in the living room, and when he went upstairs, he did so quickly. He still didn't enter the small room, but now he avoided looking into it altogether. That night, he woke earlier than usual. Not abruptly, just alert. The house was quiet in the way buildings are after midnight. No traffic, no voices. Only the faint settling of wood. He lay still for a while, then realized something was wrong. The landing light was on. He never left that light on. He was certain of it. From his bed, he could see a thin line of brightness under his door. It hadn't been there when he went to sleep. He didn't get up straight away. He told himself he must have forgotten. That tired minds make small mistakes. When he finally opened the door, the landing was empty. The light glowed softly, and the small room's door was closed. That bothered him more than if it had been open. Closed meant intention. Closed meant someone had been there. He stood there longer than he meant to, listening. The house offered nothing back. No sound. No movement. Eventually he turned the light off and returned to bed. But he slept facing the wall, as though turning his back on something unfinished. The next morning, the landlord called, just to check in. He asked casually whether everything was all right, whether the house was comfortable enough. There was a pause after the question, not long, but long enough to notice. He said yes, of course he did. The landlord didn't respond straight away, then simply said, "If there's anything you don't need, you can leave it alone." The call ended shortly after. No explanation given, none requested. After the call, he tried to settle back into normal habits. He made coffee. He answered emails. He told himself the landlord's comment had meant nothing. Still, he found himself checking the landing every time he passed the stairs. The small room remained closed, always. He began to notice dust gathering along the bottom of the door. Undisturbed, unbroken. That should have reassured him. Instead, it made him uneasy. On the fourth night, he dreamed of the house. Not anything dramatic, just corridors. Corners he didn't remember turning. Rooms that ended too soon. He woke with the sense that something had been left incomplete. When he opened his eyes, the landing light was on again. This time, he knew he hadn't left it that way. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening. The house offered the same reply it always did. Nothing. Eventually, he stood and opened the bedroom door. The landing was empty, the light steady, and the small room's door was open. Not wide, just enough to notice. He didn't step closer. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, aware of how quiet his breathing had become. The room offered no sound, no movement, but it felt occupied. Later, he would realize this was the moment he decided to leave. Not consciously, not yet. But something in him had already stopped trying to understand the house. In the morning, he packed slowly, carefully. He avoided the landing altogether. He didn't check the small room. Some things, he felt, were better left unacknowledged. When he left, he locked the door behind him and posted the key through the landlord's letterbox. He never asked for his deposit back. He never followed up. He stayed with a friend for a few nights after that. Slept better than he expected to. Still, he woke at the same time each night. Just before 2. As though his body hadn't realized the house was no longer around him. A week later, the landlord emailed. Brief, polite. He said the house had already been relet. Another short stay. Another early departure. He didn't ask why. For a while, that was the end of it. Life moved on. Work filled the space. The memory of the house softened, edges blurred, until he realized he had started dreaming of rooms again. In the dreams, the room wasn't threatening. It was simply there, always just out of sight, always unfinished. He never entered it, but he always knew where it was. One evening, months later, he walked past a house that felt wrong. Nothing obvious, just a familiar resistance in the air. He crossed the street without thinking. Only afterwards did he realize what he'd done. That was when he understood the house hadn't wanted him to stay. It had simply wanted to be noticed. And now that it had been, it no longer needed him. He never learned what was in that room. He never asked. Some places, he said, exist only to be passed, not explored, not explained. He told me all of this long after it happened, years later. He said the memory only returned when life slowed down. Late evenings, quiet rooms, busy days kept it distant. Stillness brought it closer. He never looked the house up again, never searched the address, never checked who lived there now. Some knowledge, he felt, didn't add clarity. It only created new rooms in the mind. He said the strangest part was how ordinary everything felt afterward. No lingering fear, no sense of danger, just the quiet understanding that not every place is meant to be occupied. Some spaces, he believed, exist only briefly, not as homes, not as destinations, but as points you move past, without stopping long enough to ask why. He still avoids houses with unused rooms, places where doors stay closed without reason. He doesn't say this out loud. He doesn't explain it. He just trusts the instinct and keeps walking. He finished by saying that nothing followed him from that house. No dreams, no sounds, no sense of being watched. Only the certainty that something had been complete once he left. The room, whatever it was, didn't want answers. It wanted acknowledgement. And once it had been noticed, it no longer needed anyone to stay. He never went back, and I didn't ask anything more. Some stories don't improve when you examine them too closely. They're meant to be remembered quietly, and then left alone. The last train home. He didn't usually take the last train, but that night it was the only one left. The platform was nearly empty, just a few people spaced far apart, all pretending not to notice one another. The departure board flickered above him, times updating, destinations changing. His train was listed, then wasn't, then was again. No announcement followed. When the train finally arrived, it did so quietly. No rush of wind, no familiar screech of brakes, just a slow glide into the station, as if it had been there all along. He hesitated before boarding, not from fear, from the odd sense that he'd already missed something, something small, but important. The carriage was almost empty. A man asleep by the window, a woman reading without turning the page. No one looked up when he sat down. The doors closed softly behind him. As the train pulled away, he checked his phone. No signal, no notifications, just the time, which hadn't changed since he stepped onto the platform. Outside, the city thinned. Streetlights gave way to darkness. Stations passed that he didn't recognize, and then one appeared that wasn't on the line at all. The train slowed. Doors opened. No one got off. No one got on. The doors closed again. That was when he realized he couldn't remember the name of his stop. Not forgotten, just absent. He stayed seated, watched the reflections in the glass. The man by the window hadn't moved. The woman still hadn't turned her page. Outside, the dark felt uninterrupted. He considered asking someone where the train was going, then realized no one had spoken since it arrived, not even the driver. The carriage lights dimmed slightly, not enough to notice at first, just enough to change how reflections sat in the glass. His own face looked unfamiliar. Not wrong, just distant. He checked the route map above the doors. It was blank. No stations, no line. Just a strip of plastic where information should have been. The train didn't sway as much as it should have. The motion was smooth, continuous. He realized he hadn't felt it accelerate or slow down. It felt suspended rather than traveling. At the next stop, the doors opened again. This time, the platform was unlit. No signs, no markings, just open space and the faint echo of rain somewhere far below. He didn't stand, didn't move. The idea of stepping off felt heavier than staying seated, as if leaving the train would require something he wasn't prepared to give. The doors closed again, no chime, no warning, just the soft pressure change as the carriage sealed itself. The woman across from him finally turned her page. He hadn't realized she was reading the same one the entire time. She didn't look up. He noticed then that the windows showed no reflection of the platform, only the inside of the carriage, endlessly repeated, seat after seat, passenger after passenger, more than there should have been. That was when he understood the train wasn't late. It wasn't diverted. It was simply no longer running on a schedule meant for him. He stopped trying to work out where the train was going. The effort felt unnecessary now, like asking the time in a place without clocks. Instead, he focused on small things. The rhythm of the wheels, the quiet hum beneath the floor. It was almost soothing, if he didn't think about it too much. At some point, the man by the window disappeared. Not stood up, not walked past. He was simply no longer there. No one reacted. No one looked up. The seat remained empty, warm, as if it had only just been vacated. He wondered briefly how many stops he'd missed, then realized he couldn't remember boarding anymore. The memory had softened, lost its edges. The woman closed her book, carefully. She stood without looking at him and walked to the doors. They opened before she reached them. She stepped onto the platform and vanished into the dark. The doors closed again. The train continued without pause. He remained seated, not because he was afraid, because staying felt complete, as though the journey itself was the destination. Eventually, he rested his head against the window and closed his eyes. The train kept moving. The sound never changed. Somewhere along the way, the idea of home stopped meaning a place. It became a moment, a state of being between arrival and departure. The guest in the old house. He wasn't a believer in ghosts. That is, not until the week he agreed to stay at a friend's country house. It seemed like a quiet break. Fresh air, solitude, a chance to rest. Until the first night turned ordinary into something unexplainable. The house was old, with corridors that twisted and corners that felt just out of sight. He had been invited by an acquaintance who said it was peaceful, remote, and exactly what any weary mind needed. But peace has a way of showing its opposite when dusk falls. That first evening, after the others had gone to bed, he fetched a candle in dim light and descended the wooden stairs to fetch something he'd forgotten. But as he reached the bottom, his hand brushed against something cold and unnatural. Not wood, not stone. Something that felt almost like a hand. He froze. Not out of fear exactly, but a startling awareness that something was there. He said later it was just a moment, a flash of contact. Then nothing. No shape, no face, just that chill lingering where warmth should have been. Morning light offered comfort he didn't admit aloud. But that night, 2 others had mentioned odd things too. Quiet footsteps on stairs with no one walking them. A glance seen in a window that wasn't there when turned toward. They shared these things quietly, as people do when embarrassed by disbelief or afraid of seeming foolish. One said she had woken, absolutely certain someone stood at the foot of her bed. Another described a face half glimpsed between curtains, gone when looked at directly. That night, he resolved to explore. Not out of courage, practical curiosity perhaps, to understand whether the house was merely odd or something more unsettling. Upstairs they found rooms left untouched for decades, corridors that ended in storage spaces, and a ladder leading to an attic that felt too quiet, as though space itself breathed differently up there. In the corner of the attic, behind dusty boxes, something scuttled. Not shadow, not bird, not breath, but something that collided with instinct and logic alike. It was over almost before it was noticed. The next morning, they learned the house's owner had not left for distant shores after all. He had been confined, hidden away, and what they had felt around their limbs, on the stairs, at the edges of sound, may have been something very human, broken and wandering. A fight with a ghost. I never believed in ghosts. Not seriously. I believed in tired minds, in old houses settling, in fear filling gaps where certainty should be. That belief lasted exactly 3 nights. I had been invited to stay at a country house owned by people I trusted, sensible people, practical people. They assured me the place was quiet, isolated, good for rest. The house itself felt ordinary enough. Large, a little neglected. But there was something about the corridors. They didn't echo properly. Sound seemed to stop short. On the first night, nothing happened. That, in hindsight, was the strangest part. No sounds, no movement. Just an awareness that the house was not quite empty. It was the second night that changed things. I woke needing water, still half asleep. I took a candle and stepped into the corridor. Halfway down the stairs, my hand brushed something cold. Not the banister, not the wall. Something narrow, firm. For a moment, it closed around my wrist. I pulled back instinctively. The candle guttered. There was nothing there. No shape, no sound. But my skin still burned with cold. I told myself it was imagination. That explanation is powerful. It settles the mind. It lets you sleep. That night, it failed. The next morning, one of the others mentioned footsteps. Another spoke of waking to the sense of being watched. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. That evening, we stayed together longer. Conversation dragged. Candles burned down. No one wanted to be the first to go upstairs. Eventually, we agreed something was wrong. Not haunted exactly, just unsettled. The house behaved as though it expected company that never quite arrived. Doors were found open that had been shut. Candles burned unevenly. Drafts moved through rooms where no windows were open. Small things. easy to ignore on their own. By the third night, sleep became difficult, not from fear, from anticipation, the sense that something was waiting for the house to quieten. I lay awake, listening to the rain against the windows, counting seconds, then minutes. At some point, I realized the sound of rain had been joined by something else. A movement, slow, deliberate, not footsteps, more like the careful shifting of weight by someone learning how to move again. I sat up, listened harder. The sound came from the corridor, then stopped, as if it had realized it was being noticed. I don't know why I stood. I only know that staying still felt worse. I took the candle and opened the door. The corridor was empty, longer than I remembered. The candlelight reached only so far, leaving the far end untouched by warmth. That was when I felt it again. A pressure at my sleeve, light at first, then tightening, not violent, insistent. I pulled away sharply. The candle flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape. Not clear, not whole. Just the suggestion of someone standing where no one should have been. I spoke then, not loudly. I said nothing threatening, nothing clever, only that I was awake, and not afraid enough to run. The pressure released. The corridor felt lighter, not safe, just less occupied. I returned to my room and locked the door. None of us slept properly after that. Morning came slowly. Over breakfast, no one asked questions, but everyone knew the same thing had happened. Later that day, we searched the house together, not hunting a ghost, looking for a reason. The housekeeper was the first to speak, quietly, almost reluctantly. She asked whether any of us had been to the old wing during the night. The old wing sat beyond the main staircase, unused, partially sealed, rooms kept for storage, corridors that ended abruptly, places people avoided without ever agreeing to. She told us the locks there were unreliable, that sometimes, in the early hours, doors were found open that had been bolted the night before. She never went alone. We went together, 3 of us, candles in hand. The air changed as soon as we crossed the threshold, cooler, still, as if the house ended there. Dust lay thick on the floor, but not undisturbed. There were marks, smudges, not footprints exactly, more like dragged steps. One room smelled different, stale, lived in. A narrow bed, a blanket folded too carefully to be abandoned. Someone had been there recently. That was when the explanation began to form. Not supernatural, not comforting, just human. The owner had once lived there alone, years earlier. After an illness, he had been confined elsewhere. The house remained, and someone had returned to it. At night, the house was never empty. It had only been unacknowledged. We left the old wing and sealed it properly. Locks replaced, doors reinforced. The house felt quieter afterward. Not safer. Just finished. I left the next morning, earlier than planned. No one tried to stop me. No one asked why. Some things, once seen clearly, don't require discussion. I never learned what happened to the man. Whether he was found, whether he was helped. Only that the house no longer reached out in the dark. It wasn't a ghost I fought that night. It was uncertainty. And in old houses, uncertainty has a way of taking shape.